How progressive is our industry really? Really, really, really. So there's a lot of progressive talk in this room, but outside of this, when we go back to our workplaces, how progressive do we perceive this to be, this industry to be? So what we did is we partnered with London, and we had a think about how could we measure this? How could we quantify the actual progressiveness or the perceived progressiveness of the industry? So I'm about to introduce Sophia Durrani, who is the managing partner of strategy at London. She leads the UK by Insight series with Michael Brown. And they highlight and challenge the industry to do better when it comes to breaking down toxic stereotypes with a variety of issues, which aligns very well with the Bloom agenda. So when we thought about who could quantify this, of course, would be a natural partner, and Sophia is one of our Bloom members, so it was a great fit. So what Sophia's going to do is she's going to reveal some of the numbers. We put a survey out to the industry, and many of you may have taken part. I hope you did. We had over 300 entries into the survey, and she's going to talk to us about what do you perceive the industry to really be now and for the future. So Sophia, over to you.
Okay, well, first of all, massive, massive thank you to all those of you that took part in this survey. It was mammoth, and we had phenomenal response, as Victoria just mentioned. We had people responding across all different kinds of organisations, from all levels of seniority. We had men and we had women, and it's been a real labour of love for many of us, including Michael, Kim, Victoria, and I. And for me, it's a passion project because it combines two of my greatest loves, aside from my darling children. Data, I am a geek and I'm proud of it, and also wanting to tackle inequality and injustices in this world. And we wanted to, as Victoria said, shine a spotlight to really understand what's going on in this industry. We know that the diversity and inclusion agenda and movement has had enormous gains in recent years, and it's become business imperative ultimately that companies are talking about tackling lack of representation across all of their echelons, and it's no less in communications alone. In the communications industry, we've seen a plethora of conversations about diversity and inclusion. But is this just window dressing, or are we actually turning that into action? And what do you, the people who are going to shape the future of our industry, really think about the progress that we're making? So what I'm going to present today is really very much the tip of the iceberg. There is so much data that I would love to share with you, but there are 4 key themes that have absolutely popped out of the data. The first one is we are still talking too much and not acting enough. I think as an industry, we're often painted in the media as being very forward-thinking and liberal-minded, but just 41% of people that work in this industry see it as progressive. I think that's quite a startling stat, really. When we dig into the data deeper, actually, we find that senior leaders are 20% less likely to think that the industry is progressive compared to junior talent. So while some industries have a real issue in commitment to the diversity and inclusion agenda at the top and a lack of awareness, that certainly doesn't seem to be the case in this industry. This is suggesting that actually senior leaders are aware that there is more that they could be doing. And the other thing that came out of this data is that youth are overwhelmingly more positive about the industry, the progress we're making, and diversity and inclusion as a whole. Something seemed to happen around the ages of 35 to 40. Hello. No idea what that might be, but that's something I want to discuss with my panel today. Is it at this stage that we become more aware of the injustices that people are facing? Is it that this is where we become more aware of the barriers and the fact that it's all talk and very little action? We'll find out shortly. But senior leaders aren't the only cohort that are feeling quite negative about the progress in the industry. Creative agencies also are much less likely to think that we are progressing. compared to their media counterparts. And that's not really surprising when we pick into the data and we find that actually people from creative agencies are much more likely to say that they have faced barriers in terms of their career progression, getting pay rises, promotions based on their background. We often treat this industry as one entity, and this is suggesting that that's the wrong way of doing things. Actually, we need to think about the different sectors within communications because they're at different stages of the journey. When we asked people what the most progressive organisations look like, what became really apparent is that those that have flexibility sewn into their culture are absolutely leading the way. But diversity of leadership is also incredibly important. But diversity of leadership is actually sadly lacking in the majority of organisations. So this chart is very complicated, and I'm not expecting you to be able to read the details here, but we asked people how many people at a senior level from different backgrounds are they aware of in their organisations. We asked about disabilities, we asked about LGBTQ plus backgrounds, we asked people about BAME backgrounds. And you can see on this chart a lot of red, a lot of orange, a lot of black. That's basically saying there's virtually none. Which leads quite neatly onto this next stat, actually. We asked people, when they think about diversity and inclusion, what do they actually think about? What is it that sort of really stands out? What are the sectors that come to mind? And it's no surprise, again, that the topics that are covered in the media, race, gender, sexuality, are the ones that very much lead the way. At the bottom, things like religious beliefs, parenthood, mental health are being slightly neglected. And when we ask where the progress is being made, again, we see it amongst those protected characteristics. Disability, age, are really falling by the wayside. So how can we, within this industry, make sure that we are being inclusive for all and not just focusing on one or two protected groups? How can we make sure that we are supporting, welcoming, nurturing, and attracting talent from all different sectors of society? A one-size-fits-all strategy is clearly not working because we're not at the same stage in the progressiveness journey for each of these groups. Diversity throughout the organisation is important. It's not just about being at the top, but it's about making sure there is diversity right through from the bottom all the way to the top. It's making sure that our hiring practices reflect that and making sure that we have policy in place to really support and nurture different ways of working within our organisations. That's what everybody values. That's what everybody who responded to this survey said were important factors in creating a diverse and progressive organisation. But we do differ in what we think we should support that with. So, for example, men in particular were far more likely to value unconscious bias training as a way to tackle inequalities. Women, no matter their age or seniority, want to see more senior women at the top. Media agencies think apprenticeship schemes are a great way of closing the gap. Creative agencies want to see strengthened maternity and paternity leave. And media owners are crying out for return to work schemes for people post parental leave. And now we come to the elephant in the room, and this was touched upon in the exchange panel this morning, and it's something we really need to talk about. It's only natural that we always view diversity and inclusion topics through the lens of our own experiences and our own perceptions of injustice. But the data has shown us, and it's the first time that we've really been able to quantify the experience in this way, men are actually feeling a perceived threat. They are feeling disadvantaged by the diversity and inclusion agenda. They are feeling that women are getting more opportunities than them. Now, those in these privileged positions have the greatest potential to be our best allies. Yet unless we tackle this, unless we talk about it, unless we get out of this echo chamber, we're never going to be able to redress that balance. Now, I would ask all of you, if there's one thing that you go and do after today, it's go and talk to your colleagues, talk to your partners, talk to the men that you know, get them being open about their experiences. If they're feeling a threat, it's going to curb our progress and our momentum as a diversity and inclusion movement. It's time to speak to them. So there are 4 key themes from our research, which I've whizzed through. Just to summarise, we're seeing a real positivity amongst youth that sort of filters out as we become more senior. So I want to unpick, how do we sustain that positivity? We need to think beyond race and gender. We get stuck in our tunnel vision just thinking about these sort of 2 aspects of diversity and inclusion, but there is so much more. How can we make sure we are protecting and supporting those underrepresented groups in our industry? We need to help creative agencies catch up. Are there learnings that we can share from other parts of the industry? And we need to talk about this perceived threat that men are experiencing. It's very real, it's understandable. So, I've got a wonderful panel of people who are going to come up and talk about this with me. I haven't necessarily got the answers, I'm hoping they have. But let me introduce you to them. So first up, we have got Danny Pallett. Danny is a senior creative at Dark Horses. He is passionate about bridging the education and youth divide through his work with the Young Creative Council. He's also co-founder of Badass Gal, which is a program designed to surface and lift and upskill young female creative talent. Next up, we have got Sarah Jenkins. Ignore this PowerPoint. Don't think it's supposed to be doing that. Sarah Jenkins, who is formerly CMO of Grey London and very, very soon to be MD of Saatchi and Saatchi. Forgive me if I go a bit starry-eyed. She is my idol. SJ has a CV to absolutely die for, and she's a real energy in the diversity and inclusion workspace. She's one of the founders of the Advertising Diversity Task Force, and she's got a great many learnings that she can share with us today. Next up, we've got Matt Adams. Matt Adams is CEO of Havas Media and Havas Media International. Matt has worked both media agency and media owner side, so he's going to bring some great insights of both sides to the table today. He's won many, many accolades in his career, from being identified by The Drum as top digital influencer and campaign as one of the top media planners. And he's also a member of the Bloom Exchange program, which you heard about this morning. And finally, last but not least, we've got our very own Zara Bryson, who is Strategy and Innovation Director at Publicis Media, working across the P&G brands. She is very involved in tackling D&I initiatives within Publicis Media. She sees it very much as one of her foremost goals to make sure that it is an inclusive and fun environment for all. And Zara is host of a podcast called Who's Next? And this is all about talking to women, to get them discussing their experiences to inspire others. Using this wonderful podcast experience, she is also the host of Bloom's brand new podcast, Naked Truths, which if you haven't checked it out, please do. It's inspirational. So please give my panel a warm welcome. So, some provocative data there, guys. First thing I want to pick up on is this difference between younger and older people. Senior leaders are more negative, don't see we are progressing as much. SJ, does this surprise you? Do you think that, what do you think the drivers are behind this?
Yeah, it was interesting actually, because when I first saw it, I was like, well, that's disappointing, but actually it's probably the right way round. I would rather senior leaders were cynical and beating themselves up, going, we need to do better. So I'm actually pleased. I want senior leaders to realise there's a huge gap between the reality of our industry and who we're supposed to be representing. So yes, I want senior leaders to be worrying about that and feeling that they're not pushing hard enough.
So in light of that, do you think that senior leaders are doing enough?
No, and I would include myself in that, because despite all the, thank you very much for the bio and everything, but it's so easy for anything around D&I and culture to fall to the bottom of the to-do list. So we've got to do more. And actually what I'm really supportive of, and who knows when I arrive at Saatchi's, but I would insist that anyone who has the word manager in their title, and certainly at a leadership level, your bonus, your stip, your chance of promotion should be directly tied to how you're able to develop people, look after people, and create greater representation in an organisation.
So it sounds like the ambition is there to move forwards, particularly from these senior leaders. Matt, what do you think are the barriers that senior leaders are facing? What is stopping us moving at the speed that we want to move at?
I think legacy is one of them, if I'm really honest with you, and that's not an excuse, but I think it's just a reality that you have to face into. Like when you're leading a business that needs to go through change, and positive change, there is legacy that needs to be dealt with in the right way and in a sensitive way, and that often takes time. I think it's really important that you share that vision of where you want to go. I think also, especially it's easy not to do it. It's not, we're a service industry, we ultimately will service clients or media agencies or whoever it might be, and it's kind of easy-ish to park it or go, oh, it's HR's job, isn't it? They need to deal with that, or hire a D&I manager, and then you sort of I've ticked that box, and that's kind of cracking on. So I think there's definitely some legacy that needs to be dealt with, and I think there's bravery as well. You kind of mentioned at the beginning about potentially like men feeling like mildly disenfranchised or kind of like threatened. I think was the way, and I think if you look at some of the statistics you had in terms of how do you build a business that is representative of the nation that you serve on behalf of your clients, because we from a media agency perspective and creative agency as well, it has to be reflective of the nation, not just the people who kind of work in that particular part, Soho, King's Cross, Camden, wherever it might be. And I think it's just ensuring that you're constantly driving the organisation in terms of doing it. So I think there are some legacy barriers, and I think many of those have started to fall over. And I think now the debate is absolutely as to how are we progressing and how are we progressive in terms of actually starting to get to a business that is representative of that nation and those brands that you effectively serve.
So it's interesting, you talked about tick boxes, and so we were talking earlier actually about the fact that a lot of people probably do see D&I as a bit of a tick box exercise. Danny, I don't know if you want to kind of talk about this a little bit.
So I think in terms of what we were talking about is how there's a lot of agencies have started producing their own in-house schemes, which I think are really, it's great, and it's really showing initiative. My question around it is a little bit like, is it the same people in that agency getting around the table and thinking that they've got the answer? Because I feel like we really have to address the outside world. I don't think there's always just a fix that we're going to fix it internally. Because I think there's a way of thinking in agencies. When an agency's formed, I think, I'm trying to grab my words. I think though, there's a way it can be set, and they think that it's still in line with the company. Where I think if you get external sources to come in to help kind of nurture and really teach this, you'll get something which you won't just be ticking boxes. You'll have a scheme which works for everyone and makes everyone feel welcome in the workplace. So,
we talk quite a lot about diversity and inclusion, and we almost use those terms interchangeably. Do you think we're far enough along that journey? Do you want to answer that one, Zara?
I guess I really agree with what Danny's saying about needing that external perspective. Because as you say, Matt, if it's something that's just on a long list of things to do after client work, it's just not going to get the level of priority that it needs. So in terms of diversity and inclusion, I think they need to come together. It shouldn't be that the idea of diversity alone, I think, is a tick box exercise. So if you have a panel, you have to think, okay, I must have a woman. That's the wrong way to think about it. If you don't have people who are senior in your organisation who are women, then maybe you need to think, actually, do I not have a culture that enables women to thrive? That is a question that promotes more of a discussion around inclusivity. So I think, one, D&I need to be talked about together, and then there's a really nice phrase of enabling people to belong. So instead of just thinking, so hiring policies are great, and I know some of the sessions today have talked about blind CVs, and actually having 50-50 shortlists and stuff like that, and I think that's amazing. But if you don't have an environment in your organisation where those people will stay, and you talk about that kind of awkward gap in the data between 35 and 45, and I saw something from the Lean In Institute where they said it's not a glass ceiling, it's a broken rung on the ladder, and I think that's what that data is saying. People are getting to a certain point, and then because of their background, they're not able to progress. So I think it's kind of a mixture of diversity, inclusion, and then creating environments that don't just bring people in, but enable them to stay.
So in light of that, do we think that there is a role for having diversity and inclusion officers, or should diversity and inclusion be a part of everyone's jobs? I mean, what do you guys think? Who wants to take this?
I'm happy to take this one. I think I'm not very supportive of having D&I officers, because I think it moves responsibility from where it should be, which is at the very top of an organisation. And there are some incredible people out there who are experts, and you see what they've done, like Serena Abbasi at M&C, but responsibility for people has to sit with the CEO, the C-suite, head of department, and it's a complicated world. Of course, we've got to lean on experts, but yeah, I have an issue with it, because I think it's a big tick box exercise most of the time, I think.
So that's interesting. We're talking a lot about senior leadership, but there are lots of people in the audience today who are very young and starting out their careers. So Zara, why don't you answer this one? What can young people do to help progress this movement and create more?
I don't have the answers. But one thing that I think is quite amazing is that at this moment in time we have amazing role models with young people. Think about Greta, she's taking on a massive task of essentially trying to reverse the damage that kind of we've done to this planet. Like, that's a 16-year-old taking on this huge role. And we've got people like Gina Martin who are changing the law on upskirting, so something where our law was out of date. It didn't take into account something that was happening. And actually someone really quite young has managed to change the law. So I think in terms of role models, there are loads of amazing people out there, and I think young people are looking up to them and thinking, I can actually make amazing changes. But I would caveat that they should have senior support as well. And if you've got some really young, enthusiastic people on your team, listen to them, ask what they're thinking, because they're going to have a perspective that will be interesting, and it might not be something that you want to implement straight away. They might have some crazy idea, but maybe they'll have an amazing idea that you just hadn't thought of. So I think I know the data is very much like showing the differences between different groups, so senior leaders and junior members of staff are on the way up. But I think there's a need for kind of cross-generational collaboration. So getting that energy from the youth, that experience from the kind of more senior leaders, and then what you can do with that. So yeah, my advice to young people would be have great ideas and then speak to your senior leaders about how they can help you enact them.
I think it's really interesting on that point. Like, I think the old way was, I'm senior, I've got the experience, I know better than you, junior person. And I think what I find really interesting and throughout my career so far is I love doing book crits because I learn from junior people as well. Like, I'm seeing incredible ideas. Their portfolios have changed so much. It's not just a print ad anymore, it's not a TV script, it's social posts, it's a fall-through campaign. More than that, it's an entrepreneurial book sometimes, which is incredible. But I just think that change from I'm senior, I've got the experience. Senior people, I feel worried now because suddenly clients want millennials, Gen Z, to answer the brief, and look and feel. And I think it's looking at that and understanding that we need to work with the experience, but also the youth, young people, juniors, can bring everything they live in outside of work into work, because it's so, right now, I think it's so vital. So many clients want that, and if anything, I feel like they're sometimes now the most valuable part of a brief is like, how do I target football obsessed teens, right? How do I get there? So, as a senior person who's not a teenager anymore, how do I get there? Like, when you get young people in, I think that really helps. But mixing the two together.
Yeah, I heartily agree, but also I think it's such an ageist industry that we work in. Like, people disappear after 50. Like, a lot of people disappear, like not everyone, obviously. But I think there's something where it's understanding the value of everyone in the system. So, like, Jane Evans, who founded the Invisibility Project, had so much experience to give, yet she was finding that in her career they deemed her to be irrelevant after a certain point. And so I think it's getting that combination of getting the right people on the brief, and that's not just about age, it's also if you've got a brief that isn't about a group of people who are from the background you're from, like, it shouldn't just be white men doing a brief about, menopause or something like that. So I think getting the right people in the room and having a variety. It shouldn't just be one or the other. It should be really making sure that the teams truly are diverse.
Okay,
Sorry,
so
passionately jumped in there.
let's pick up on this idea that certain cohorts are feeling threatened by this, by the progress that we're making. And Matt, I am going to pick on you now, because is it possible for a white, middle-aged man to be
I'll find one, you can ask one.
to be a diversity champion without it feeling disingenuous, without it feeling like they're doing it through the privilege of guilt or because...
I mean, I hope so. We'll go home otherwise. I mean, I think that, you know, I think it has to be, because I just think that you'll have change otherwise, or you just have a load of talent at a certain level, like leaving an organisation and going to be a landscape gardener, which has definitely crossed my mind at least once this week. I mean, I think in reality that, you know, you have to make a change in organisation. And what I've learned very quickly is the things that, you know, everyone in any business of any size or scale, if I'm honest, or even small businesses, like, will do an annual survey or monthly polls or weekly whatever. And they'll ask people, a smorgasbord of questions, what they think about the organisation. And the one that always comes up as the worst is action. Like, no one fucking believes that anyone's going to actually do anything about this, annual survey about, what you think, feel, and love, hate about a company. And I think as a senior leader, like, if you can show action, and if you can show that you've made tangible steps to change the organisation that you lead, that no one else has responsibility to, apart from you as the CEO, to be more representative, more inclusive, to enable people to bring themselves to work, then I think you can. I inherited a business that had an 8% female leadership team, and by 9 months later, we had 50%, right? That was actually relatively easy to do, but there's nothing more frustrating, disappointing, whatever the word might be, for the people that work in the organisation, to hear someone banging on about something and tweeting a load of shit that they just don't deliver. It just becomes this massive gap between rhetoric and reality. So I think as a leader of a business, regardless of race, colour, background, I do think, like, if you can show action and change and inclusivity, then I do think you have a role to be able to make a difference. And in a way, it's more incumbent on you to be able to do that because of where you come from. But you can't help where you're from. I mean, that doesn't matter if you're working class or privileged. And I think it's just about recognising the position you've got to and thinking about how you got there and how you can empower others to get there. And also, like, understanding that, the business I run, and that any leader will run, like, the kind of, like, to your point about, the young folks, for want of a better expression, in 80, want something really different to what I wanted when I was young, like, really different. And I sit on a management team, and I'm like, I just don't think we know the answer, because, like, I'm not 25, believe it or not, right? And nor are many people on my management team. So I think you have to be really, really open to getting feedback from the business in terms of, like, what is the culture that people want to be part of, not trying to recreate the culture that you were part of when you were going up through your career. And I think if you can do that, and you can create positive change, and you can demonstrate action, not just words, then I do think that you have a role to play in it.
So how do we tackle this perceived threat? How do we encourage more men to be allies when they are feeling at a disadvantage?
Do you know what? Like, I could be, like, mildly controversial, right? I just don't see it. I'm like, I don't start, like, shitting my pants if I'm going to sit in a room with a woman and no one else is in there, because I can't control myself. Like, I just think it's like, but seriously, like, I not just from the brilliant research you've done, but from other stuff, you hear this continued perceived threat, and I'm like, I think it's only a threat if you're a bit worried about yourself. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, I regularly, so my job is to sit in rooms and talk to people, quite frankly. And I do that many, many hours a day on, from clients to people who work in the organisation. And I've never felt uncomfortable having a conversation with a female in a room, right? I've never felt, oh my God, like, I can't go and have that conversation, right? And so I honestly find that actually personally quite difficult to relate to, because I think as a leader in a business, if you can't create an environment and have a workforce that is open to listening and wanting to be with you, and you've got a track record of not having a business that is, tarnished by bad behaviour, let's put it that way, then I do think that threat is self-imposed to me as a man. It is psychologically self-imposed, and you know what? Like if you're confident about your own conduct, then I don't think there's a threat to be had.
Danny, you've done a huge amount to be an ally to women. What's your viewpoint? Because one of the things that came out in the data is that it's not just older men that are feeling threatened and feeling at a disadvantage, feeling like women are getting all the opportunities. It is younger men as well.
Yeah, I think with like in the workplace, and going back to your point around kind of white middle-aged men and what they can do with it, I think there are a lot of what I want to call future-facing guys that are coming into the industry. I'm not saying that's 100% of them. Like, it is. There are a number that I could name, and I think they're the people. If they sit in your office, a senior person, a manager, should be looking at the people in their office and be able to go, they've got a view on this. We should talk to them. They should be part of this conversation, because going back to how shaping a company. It's not just made by the person that founded the company, it's made by everyone there. And if you want a diversity and inclusion scheme to work, I think you have to address who's in your office. And I feel like, yes, a lot of guys will act the same, talk about football and beer, whatever, but then if you've got the person that also is in your office who is pushing forward for things, I think you should, a smart company to me would be highlighting and thinking, right, we should be talking with them and seeing how their view on it. But then also I think like how men become less threatened, I think through Badass Girl, what I've had so many people actually ask me when Badass Guy is going to start, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you need that? Like, and I think that's really interesting and stupid, but I think something I addressed back in March when we did a year of Badass Girl was, I don't want Badass Girl just to be a girls' club. I mean, I'm a male CEO, co-founder of it, and it doesn't make sense to me. And I just think by inviting more guys in, by talking with more guys and women together, it will make everything better. I think that's the way. Like it's not about just women getting together and chatting. It's not about guys getting together and being negative. It's about us coming together, and it's not all of us coming together. I think it's the ones that can do it and then can go back into the office and affect change. Because I think with guys especially, it's if one guy has a different point of view, a slight angle on something that doesn't fit in with your stereotypical view, that can slightly have an effect on, if it's just one guy in the office, then the next day it's another guy and another guy. I think that is a way that you can kind of get guys more on side with it, is when they see change through their colleagues.
So one of the top goals of Bloom this year is to attract more men in, and actually we're seeing a hell of a lot more men than we have in previous years, which is absolutely wonderful. Shout out to all of you guys here. But it's still a challenge. Yeah. Are there things that you think that we could do, anybody on the panel want to take this one, that can get, to make sure that men are coming to events like this, to be able to step out of that echo chamber? We're inviting them, they're not necessarily coming.
Go on. There was an amazing session earlier called The Active Ally, and I think people should definitely, hopefully the content will be shared around, but it was really interesting to me because, so it was advertising and Unmistakable's that ran it, and they were great. If they're still here, amazing. But I think it all starts with understanding what your privilege is, and we all have it. And it's not just, I think there's a bad rep with white male privilege, and people say it over and over again, and then white men get quite defensive. We all have privilege, whether it's education, whether it's where we're born. Actually, a lot of us, I'm sure, were born in the UK. That's a massive privilege. So the fact that we have this privilege, that you start there, and then from there you think, how can I understand other people? And the thing that I think is a problem, and it's I know we're probably quite a biased room of people who are probably very likely to be male allies, but it's not the norm, and I don't think it is the norm. So there's some research that the Lean In Foundation did that after Me Too, male managers were a lot less likely to mentor women. So I think there are these things that are happening, they look amazing, but then they're actually having an unexpected impact where people are feeling that there's a barrier that's suddenly been put up, and I don't think it has. So I think it's understanding your privilege and then understanding the kind of people who you're trying to connect with, whether that's asking them questions or researching and coming to events, because I think there's this terrible idea that gender equality is a women's issue, and I just think it's nuts. It's an everybody issue. It's the same with creating diverse teams. So everybody should be wanting us to have diverse teams. Sorry, I've got on a bit.
No, I think Zara's making a really good point. There are so many incredible events that are run where you're informed, inspired, learn, understand, and it is us all going. It's all of us going to the same events, isn't it? And I think that on a practical level, guys, we've all got to start doing it. Just take one male manager to one event a year and just think, like, there's what, 200 people in the room, 300 people, that's 300 managers suddenly going to an event. And I think it's opaque, it's complex D&I, there's a lot going on. There's definitely a cohort of, like, I'm scared I'm going to get it wrong. There's a cohort that are lazy. There's a cohort of amazing woke allies as well. But take a manager to an event, one event, and like on a practical level, we've got to do it more often. And it pushes it up the to-do list. By definition, if you go to an event, you inevitably have a bit of an action off the back of it. So I think there's a positive consequence to going to an event. So yeah, on a practical level, let's get more guys coming to brilliant events like this.
I love that. So we're going to see a lot more men next year. So I want to talk a little bit about the fact that sort of age, disability and class were very much at the bottom of the answers when we ask people about what they think about. It's definitely areas that are neglected, and it suggests this one-size-fits-all strategy isn't necessarily working from a D&I perspective. So what can we do to nurture and create a supportive environment for all different types? I mean, obviously businesses have to have priorities. As senior leaders, SJ, Matt, what do you think do we need to have those priorities? Maybe that's an assumption that's not right.
Maybe. I mean, I think for me, like, it's just ensuring, like, first and foremost, that we have a really, like, we give equal opportunity, right? I think it starts there. I think it's two key things. So I think first it's like making sure that we remove, you can never fully remove it, but we do everything we can to remove bias, right? And we look for the best person to fulfil that role, regardless of disability, sexuality, race, age, gender, etc., etc. And I think that's been a huge part of what we've done in my organisation over the last couple of years, is just to ensure that we are having an equal opportunity workplace. I think secondly is there are less people in our industry that are to take disability, right? There are just less disabled people in our workplace. So actually it starts at the bottom in terms of a bit more, dare I say it, it's totally the wrong word, but sort of grassroots, right? In terms of going, actually, how can we go to those communities and start to say that there is an opportunity here, there is a career here, there is a workplace that you can be your genuine self in, and we need to adapt our workplace and our working practices around those people, the same way that you might, adjust role types or something for someone who might have like a mental health challenge, for example, right? And so I think there's a lot to do around educating and reaching out into certain groups in society to say there is opportunity and we need your input and we need that. We do a lot of work around working class, and we forget that we're all sat in a lovely Channel 4's office and it's all brilliant, and some people don't even know we exist or that exists, and the best they could kind of hope for growing up is probably not to be part of a gang. And there's some amazing talent and they just don't know that our world exists. So trying to bring people in and give them that experience and opportunity, whether they can leave with a qualification or leave with experience or stay in the organisation, shouldn't be just limited to able-bodied but from a disadvantaged or working class background, but it should be from a disability background and some of the others as well, in terms of how we do that. So I think there's firstly just ensure that bias doesn't exist and we're able to bring people into the organisation for the best person for the job, regardless of any of their personal attributes, for want of a better expression, and then also think about how we can bring more of those people in, because I just don't think there are many. There are a few, but there are not enough role models, or there's not enough talent to exist, to fulfil that. It just doesn't exist.
So I'd like to pick up on that idea of role models. A lot of people are not particularly comfortable talking about some of their characteristics. They might not be comfortable talking about religion. They might not be comfortable talking about mental health. Obviously, we've had some wonderful work here today with the fishbowl earlier. But if role models are so important, how do we manage that tension? Danny, I don't know if you want to talk about this.
Yeah, I think for me, role models, I never really thought of it too much, but I went to a talk from Future's ND, and I have dyslexia, and up until last year I didn't really admit it to myself. And I know on employee forms you can be like, do you have a disability? And for the first time I got encouraged to put dyslexia. I have no idea what that did at all. Did a talk at this event, and after I talked, an ECD got up and started talking about his form of invisible disability. I think it was autism, and for me that was groundbreaking, because suddenly all the managers I've ever known, people I have to work up and look up to, there was one that had said, hey, I've got a form of disability here, and this is the way I work with it, this is the way I get around it, this is how I own it. And for me that was so empowering, and I think I never really thought about role models being so powerful like that. But I think because he's spoken out about it, it's made me feel a lot more okay about talking about it. And I think that is part of it, the more I talk about it and the more I'm okay with it, and the more I can talk to other people about it, that is where things, again, can start changing. And I think that will help the workplace improve a bit.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I think there's something there just about, and Zara mentioned that culture of belonging. If you feel like you belong and you feel comfortable and confident in your workplace, you're going to feel more confident coming out, you're going to feel more confident talking about mental health, you're going to all those things. And then once you start talking about it, there's the role model, and the role model will appear. So I think on a macro level, what are we doing, and what all of us, doesn't matter what level you are, everyone here can create a culture of belonging. What are you all doing to make everyone in your team feel like they belong, can talk about their real selves? What are you doing to make sure that intern who looks absolutely bloody terrified that first morning, to give them that biggest smile and say, how you doing? We can all do it, and I think it's really easy. I think, God, it's really complicated, I can't help, I'm not a CEO. We can definitely all create that culture of belonging and call out the bad behaviour as well. As Matt said, I love that idea of calling out the guys that go, oh, it's really complicated. Well, no, sexual harassment's pretty clear. So, yeah, it's that culture of belonging. Yeah.
I think that's a really nice point. Everyone is a role model to someone. We've got a few minutes left. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Hi. I currently am in a position where I think that my company could do with a lot of change. And there are 1,000 ideas in my head about what we need to do, and not really how we need to do it. And also I get quite a lot of blockers from all sorts of directions. And you currently work for companies that are already very much developed in many ways. But maybe if you were to look back at the time where you were just starting the transformation of the business, how did you prioritize what goes first and what goes next? And how did you sell that to people who are really, let's say, non-believers?
That's a great question. Who
Can I dive in?
wants to take that one?
I might take it, yeah. I think I've definitely been there, and I think it's amazing that you have all of these ideas. And I think it's taking a little bit of time and thinking, okay, are there anyone else that I can collaborate with? Because it's a lot to have all of these problems to solve on your own. And so I'd say first, think who on the team actually is interested in this stuff, who can you collaborate and come up with some ideas, and almost maybe put together a proposal. Because I think leaders want problems to be solved. Like, they do. And they're probably sitting there maybe thinking about some of the solutions that you've come up with, or even nuggets of ideas that will become a solution. So I think find someone who will listen to you, and in your organisation, I mean, if you feel genuinely that no one will listen to any of your ideas for progress for that business, then that could be another discussion about whether it's the right business. But presumably there will be people who you admire what they're doing and you look up to, and you think, I've got some great ideas. And just starting a conversation at that, because, for example, at Publicis, they have a next generation board, which I think is an amazing idea, and obviously if organisations don't have that, But they also had kind of a bit of a groundswell of people who were seeing things that maybe they wanted to change. They grouped together, and now they have meetings with the management board with some of ideas, and actually they get briefed on things as well, like, okay, how do we make this work better? So I think don't be disheartened if you think at the moment those ideas that you have aren't going anywhere, because maybe it's about packaging, getting a kind of team and other people with you. So sounds like you're doing great.
Any more questions?
Just shout. One thing that I've been hearing more on is that there is lots of great talk about diversity and inclusion, lots more sort of being covered in the trade press, and people sort of speaking up about it, but change isn't happening fast enough. And I'd love to know from each of you, what would be the things that you would like to see actioned by the end of next year that would actually accelerate that change?
I think everyone's a bit fucked this year because about 4 years ago we all put these 2020 plans in place, and then it seemed like quite a long while away then. And I'm pretty sure that in any business you can dig out from the archives a 2020 plan that's been completely not delivered. So there's a few of us who are looking around about 2 months and going, oh, bugger. I mean, I think there's definitely a few in my business, by the way. I think that if you rerun the research, the simplest thing is it's changed, right? And people do feel that the industry is more progressive, and that people do feel is more representative. I think from a personal perspective, like my perspective, we have 3 offices around the UK, right? Everything just feels very London-centric, right? And we recruit people like us from places like where we live, and from like home counties, and nice proximity to London. London's a very expensive place to live. You're starting out in your career, and from my personal perspective, like we need to change that. We've opened more offices around the UK to kind of like build more diversity into it. We need to be better at supporting people at their early careers coming in. We're looking at actually taking housing as a business, and we're quite far down that line at the moment to give support to people, again, from working class backgrounds. So even if they go, there's an amazing opportunity. Like, I earn 20-something grand and I live in London, and the rent's pretty high, right? And they don't have support from parents. I personally have a big challenge around that. I think every leader does who works in a London-based business in terms of the proximity and the location. And I think if you said, like, what do you want to do by the end of the next year, Matt, I think in my business is have more people in my business that are more representative of the nation.
Okay. SJ, one thing that you would want to see change?
Yeah, I think we need to move a lot faster and a lot more brilliantly, and I would want every agency to have to collect data and publish it, even if it's just within their own agency, because I think... and media owners, because I think data talks, and then clients can ask the question, and then so I think get the data.
I think, I'm sorry on that point, because there's quite. This always fucks me off, right? There's quite a few media owners in this room. The IPA and campaign do a lot of surveys around gender diversity and equal pay and so on and so forth. Media owners do not sign up to that, right? So you'll see it, and I think there's broadly creative agencies and media agencies. There is absolutely zero industry body that right now collects data on diversity, gender, etc. than media owners.
Sorry, I was sharing the mic, but I think because I know the IPA do, and that's brilliant, but the data has to be collected independently and anonymous, because I don't think the data is right at the moment, because how can... Yeah, Creative Equals are doing a great job as well. So find a way of getting that anonymous, independent data for your agency, because how else are you going to know your LGBTQ plus profile or your mental health or social mobility? So once you've got the data, it becomes both a carrot and a stick.
Okay, we're running out of time, so just before we wrap up completely, I just want everybody on the panel to tell me one thing that every single person in this room can do themselves when they leave this room that will action change moving forwards. What can we do as people from the grassroots right through to senior leaders?
I'll speak up, like, if there's a frustration in your organisation, you've raised it a number of times, it's the right thing to do, like, and you're doing the right thing, like, just fucking leave and go and get another job, because, everyone here is incredible talent. People like me spend a lot of time thinking about how I can attract amazing talent in this organisation, and I just think, there's so many amazing stories of people
who don't speak up, like knock on your CEO's door, like demand that time, like raise that issue. And if it's a business that doesn't want to open the door, then like maybe go to another business. I mean, sorry, but that's my.
Is that a Havas plug?
I didn't mention my company's name.
I would say, and maybe related to that point, about what sort of action we should have, I think everyone has the ability to be an ally, and whether it's not like on International Women's Day suddenly you're an ally to women, and then the rest of the year you're like, okay, I'll put my ally coat down, and and I don't have to worry about that. Same with Black History Month, like as Lady Phil said earlier, she's still black in November. Like, we really need to ensure that people aren't just dipping in and out of this support, and senior leaders in particular, and junior staff who have got these exciting ideas, even if it's not about their... I really don't think it should be the group that you're part of you have to fight for. It's nuts. As I mentioned before, gender equality isn't a women's issue. Ethnic diversity isn't, the minority groups have to fight this. So being an ally the whole time, and wherever you can for the groups that you can see there are issues. That would be my bit of a long one as well.
Yeah, well, my dream is that everyone here takes one powerful person from their company to an event, and it might not be an all-day event, but just 1 2-hour event in the evening. Just everyone does that. There's 300 people that are being educated and informed.
That's great. Danny?
You went for one event, I went for like 365.
Mine is take action, and whatever that action is, it's change for you. That can be big or small. I mean, as I say, create awareness gal. It doesn't have to be create an initiative. It doesn't have to be tearing down a wall. It can be a little change for yourself, because that little change for yourself in the office can affect other people in the office. And I think that's the way that we are all going to make a better environment and a better industry.
Sophia?
Oh God, I didn't. No, you can't put it on me. You've taken all the good ones.
You've got one. You've got one. What's the dream?
What would I do? No, I'm going to come back to you on that one. I'm going to cop out answer. Right, time to wrap up. Thank you very much for being a wonderful panel. Everyone, please give them a round of applause.
Thank you.